I'll start this morning with these words from gay activist and long-time HIV/AIDS activist Cleve Jones. The shift is there, deep, tectonic, massive. It is everywhere around us. And in the air and under the waving grass and flowering trees, it grinds beneath the oceans and granite and sand. You can hear it. A murmur this morning, insistently loud by midday, a high-pitched keening wail at dusk, and now as night falls, a steady, thunderous roar. In cities, on farms, in mountain villages, in the cul-de-sacs of the suburbs, in old factory towns of the Rust Belt, and hip urban precincts of the coasts, across the land, the great shift reveals. This is the moment when history meets flesh, when hands find hands, when the future quivers before us like a delicate, iridescent bird hovered over a blossom. In our way lies a filthy carcass, its putrid flesh covered by a swarm of blue-black flies. It blocks the avenue with its stink and bulk and dreadful, rotting weight. Tonight, we sleep. Tomorrow, we will break bread with the ones we love and tend to the cats and dogs and gardens, then ready ourselves for the task ahead. This is the moment. Hands find hands, birds find blossoms. Look to the sky. Look to those who stand at your shoulders. We are the storm, the earthquake, the flood, and the hurricane. We are the scouring wind and the cleansing water. This is the moment. As someone who rests at the upper end of the millennial generation, I spent lots of my childhood unsupervised with a television. And perhaps even more dangerously, I spent lots of time supervised by my older brother. The only thing worse than an unsupervised child is a child supervised by their older sibling. And one rainy Saturday afternoon, my brother, right, because he was older, so he always got to pick what was on TV if there were two of us, he decided we were going to watch Poltergeist. Now, I have no stomach for horror movies, and I certainly didn't back then. I think I was probably about 8 years old. The 90s were a different time. And I have no stomach for horror movies, but I found something deeply transfixing about Poltergeist that made me stay in the room instead of leaving like any sane person would have done in that moment. We had a whole house. I could have chosen a different thing to do. But instead, I got treated to a Saturday afternoon special of Poltergeist. And for those of you who haven't seen it, Poltergeist tells the story of a family who moves into a new home in a brand new subdivision, but strange things begin happening. And eventually, their 5-year-old is sucked through their television into a ghost dimension. She comes back, it's fine. And they begin to realize that what's happening, all these strange things, all these, portals to other ghost dimensions, etc., is because their housing development was built over an old cemetery, and the builders allegedly, they moved the graves and relocated the bodies in order to build the homes, and that's why the ghosts are all of a dither about these new houses. But the real plot twist, and I don't think I'm going to offer a spoiler alert here because Poltergeist is older than I am, is that the contractors and developers who built the houses only pretended to move the graves. They moved the headstones, left people's remains in place, and built houses because it was cheaper to do it that way. At the time, I reassured myself that this was pure fiction. Surely I would not be sucked through our television into a ghost dimension. But honestly, the older I get, the more plausible it seems that housing developers cheaped out and instead opened a portal to a ghost dimension by building a new housing development on top of a cemetery. And sadly, this is one of those moments where the truth, the real life, is more sinister than fiction. The ways that we choose to put profit over people, profit over earth, profit over ecosystem, profit over one another, and the ways that it affects the people in our communities and our country and our world, right? The truth is more sinister than any Hollywood movie plot. The Green Sanctuary team, when we were discussing this climate revival, and I said, what do you hope I might say or talk about on Sunday? And they said, one of the things we want to lift up is the realities of what we think of as environmental racism. The realities that the ways we treat our earth and exploit and degrade the ecosystems that we live in have disproportionate impacts, both within our own country, on poor people and black and brown people, but also globally on those without as much access to means. For example, did you know that most of the hazardous waste sites in our country are in close proximity to federally funded housing? An EPA study from 2017, and then a deep study in 2020 by the Shriver Center on Poverty Law, showed that more than 70% of hazardous waste sites officially on the national priorities list, that means they're a problem, are located within 1 mile of federally assisted housing developments. As part of that same Shriver Center on Poverty Law study, Akeisha Daniels, who was a former resident of the West Calumet housing complex in East Chicago, Indiana, shared these words. We found out that we were living on top of a lead refinery. By the time we learned that the soil under our homes was contaminated, 40% of the children tested in our community had elevated blood lead levels. There were over 680 children in our housing complex being poisoned by lead every day. And if you look at photos shared as part of that study, you see dystopian signs underneath trees telling children not to play in the dirt. And we could stay here all day. We could be here for we could be here all day. And I would not have time to share all the stories that I could share about the ways that our collective society level decisions to put profit over human life, profit over ecosystem, profit over nature, have led to horrific impacts, not just to ecosystems, not just to non-human species, but to human life. And we would never run out of stories. And this week, as I've been preparing this sermon, I've been sitting with that story from Akeisha Daniels. And as a parent, it seems just unconscionable that we would let that happen. And not just that we would let that happen, but that someone made the choice for that to happen. And when I think about that, I think about maybe we deserve to be sucked into the ghost dimension. Right? Maybe that's all we've earned as human beings. Maybe that's what our society has earned for our series of actions and inactions that have led us to this place where we let children play in dirt that is genuinely poisoning them because their parents make less money. Like, let the portal open up, suck us in, we earned it. And then I remember that I am a universalist and a prison abolitionist, and that punishing people by sending them to other dimensions is also not allowed under those positions. Darn it. And so that means that we have to figure out a different way forward. Because sometimes when we have movements for change, and I mean this about big, broad-based movements for change, like the environmental movement, or movements for women's rights, or queer rights, when we have those broad-based movements, we sometimes run the risk of we realize the house is haunted, but instead of saying, so we need to leave this behind and go build somewhere different, new, somewhere where there are not dead bodies under the earth. Instead, we say, well, we'll knock this house down and build another one right here. And this one definitely won't be haunted. It's haunted. And we do this in our own lives too, when we try to make big changes in our own lives. We realize that something is haunted, an approach to relationships, a way of being in the world, habits. We sense their hauntedness, but hope that if we just keep rebuilding on the same ground where those builders left the bodies under the earth, like the family in Poltergeist, we think that what we build won't be haunted. It's haunted. Right? That our question, for me, is, are we just rebuilding a house on the same old haunted ground? Or are we working to reject the ideologies that underpin the oppressive systems that we want to undo, that we want to dismantle? Because underneath every oppressive system, there are ideologies buried under the ground, propping it up. And if all we ever do is put the Band-Aid on, if all we ever do is say, this is broken, so we'll dismantle it, but we rebuild something without ever digging underneath, we're going to recreate the same thing over and over again. We will put the Band-Aid over the cut and wake up 48 hours later to realize that it is rather infected. So when we think about what's next for our climate advocacy, what's next in our world, what's next in our lives? Because for some, how many of you, you're like, you know what, I can't solve any more of the world's problems. Reverend Hannah, I'm all done solving the world's problems. I'm tired. That your problems in your life are, in fact, a microcosm of the world's problems. And so if that's where you are beginning, if that's where you are today, that's a great place to be. A fine place to be. But the same principle applies. That if there's some structure you're trying to change in your life or in our world, and you're not digging under the surface to find that ideology that's underneath it, that's haunting it, it won't really change. I think about the opening reading that I offered from activist Cleve Jones. who has been an activist for decades and decades and decades and decades, but who wrote that piece recently. I think about the image of an iridescent bird hovered over a blossom, transcendently beautiful, filled with possibility. And in our way, a decaying carcass. The vision that will take us beyond getting stuck at the decaying carcass. We have to believe in some of the beauty of that possibility, that things could be different. And that is one of the gifts of, I find, the work that Green Sanctuary does, the work that so many of our justice ministries do, the work that our religious exploration classes do, the work that we do in music here at the fellowship, the work that happens in small groups, is that it is all looking towards how do we cultivate that sense of vision, that something different could be possible for you, for me, for us, for our world, for our children. And so I hope that that is what we can carry with us. That in the midst of these bitter stories of despair, to let them motivate us not to further despair, to banishing one another through the portal to another dimension. Right? That let this motivate us not to further despair, but to deeper commitment. That something different could be possible, and that we have all we need to create it right here, among each other, among our community, and that if you feel some sense of possibility right now in your community, in your relationships, that this is your moment to ride that wave of possibility and to envision that a different world is possible. May it be so.